The lower The lower classes have always been a slave class. It doesn't make any difference what race they belong to. They're always treated the same way. They are always deliberately and intentionally suppressed, and they are always, often treated quite miserably and quite poorly. And this has gone on for hundreds of years. It's a very inefficient way of doing things, because when you plague and cause plague, allow plagues and diseases to flourish within the lower classes, it also affects the upper classes. There are nobles that also died from plagues and stuff. An example of how the poor are kept poor, and there's many, many ways to use, but just one example is the fact that you'll notice in the United States and most Western countries, education is free up to 12th grade. Not only free, it's mandatory. That's because it has a lot to do with mind control crap that they put on people. A lot of the high school curriculum is just crap. I remember years ago my college professor, chemistry professor, was complaining about the crap they were teaching in high school chemistry and how useful it was. He says they were teaching stuff that's like 80, 90 years old. And but you'll notice, it's free education up to 12th grade. That's because they want the poor in the slave class to know certain things and to undergo certain types of programming. But you notice, it costs an arm and two legs to get into the upper class or the middle class. You have to have a degree. That's that magic degree. Now, I know a whole lot of people who have degrees are as ignorant as a pile of dog manure, okay? And I know people that don't have degrees who are very intelligent. But that reason for keeping college prices sky high is that the poor can't get educated and can't get that little magic degree, that little magic diploma, which is their ticket into the middle class. The middle class are the educated and skilled slaves. They're slaves too, but they are the educated and skilled slaves. They need educated and skilled slaves, and the middle class has to be treated a little bit better than the lower class. The lower class has to be treated like absolute crap. There's the housing things that they do. The streets are deliberately allowed to run down. Buildings are deliberately allowed to run down so they look ugly. It's depressing. They do this deliberately. It is planned, intentionally, deliberately planned. You notice you go to high-class neighborhoods, the streets are nice. Everything is kept in nice looking. But in going to the low-class neighborhoods, everything looks like a dump. Okay? That is done deliberately. It's not just because poor people are just trashy, ignorant people. If you took those people out of there, treated them decent, allowed them to become educated, they wouldn't behave the way they do. They wouldn't be acting the way they do. And then drugs are also pushed into the lower classes. This is another way of what I would call the fleecing of the poor. Another thing, you notice the poor are always fleeced. They have to pay twice as much for everything. It's like, well, the upper class and the middle class can afford a lot of these things. The poor class can't afford a lot of this crap. But things, even necessities of life, are like ridiculously expensive, like cell phones, phone service. It's absolutely outrageous what they charge. I know people who have a lot of problems trying to pay their phone. And I know a couple people who actually have mental problems, and they don't know when to shut up. And they end up getting in trouble and losing their phone over and over again. But, the problem is the sky-high cost. It's absolutely ridiculous for cell phone service and phone services to cost what they charge. It's absolutely atrocious. It shouldn't be. It's got to be, they must be making 100 times profit for everything they do. As technology improves, the cost of electronics always goes down. Yet cell phone services prices, if anything, they're going up. The infrastructure costs money to put in place, like the cell phone towers and stuff. But once that's in place, it's just maintenance. So there's no reason for these costs. I know people whose phone service is $1,000 a month. That's absolutely outrageous. That's outrageous. When technology increases, prices should go down. Phone service, it goes up. I could give you a dozen examples. The lower class are kept poor and they're kept miserable, and this is done deliberately. Why? Because it's a fucking tradition, that's why. It comes out of sadism. It's fun to step on your slaves, but also, When you keep the slaves miserable, it's easier to control them. It's sort of easier to manipulate them. So the slaves are deliberately kept miserable. They're poisoned deliberately. You notice the food, processed food, is always cheaper than unprocessed food, which is ridiculous. Processing food should cost more. The more work you do on something, the more it should cost. Yet processed food, the one that contains all these chemicals and these poisons that slowly over decades poison people and make them sick and cause them to have health problems, that food is cheap. Yet wholesome food that isn't poisoned is very expensive. The poor can't afford to buy health food. The poor can't afford to buy decent, high-quality, nutritious food. They have to eat this crap, which is poisoned. And this is done deliberately to make them sick and to make them unhealthy and to make them miserable.